All right, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm the event coordinator at SubText Books in downtown St. Paul. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm glad we can all have this virtual space together on a Friday night to celebrate Mai Der Vang's Yellow Rain. Yay! I'm so thrilled to have her here tonight to talk about this wonderful book. I'm equally thrilled to have author Kao Kalia Yang here as conversation partner. I'm really, really excited for this event, and thank you for joining us. I also want to thank our co-presenters, Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you, Clarence, for being here. We so appreciate the work you do, and we love working with you and all that good warm feelings. A few housekeeping notes before we get started, of course. You can purchase Yellow Rain from us at SubText Books. You can do so via the big green button below your screen. You can also visit us at subtextbooks.com and search for it that way. Of course, if you're in St. Paul or in the Twin Cities, you can come in and visit us at the store. We would love to see you. We offer in-store curbside pickup as well as shipping nationwide. The event is being recorded, so if you have to step away for whatever reason, you can come back using the same link you used to get here tonight and rewatch it to your heart's content. And there will be time at the end of the event for audience questions from you. So as you're listening to Mai Der and Kalia talk, feel free to put those in the chat at the right-hand side of your screen or in the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be sure to get to them at the end. And now I'd like to bring in Clarence White at Eastside Freedom Library to say a few words. Clarence?
Thanks. At the Eastside Freedom Library, we have about 26,000 catalog books that are all cataloged by volunteers. So it's a place that holds a lot of knowledge. We also like to think of ourselves as a place where knowledge is created and new knowledge is shared. And much of the institution that has created us, and as many libraries are, it comes with a narrative that isn't necessarily representative of what our society truly is. And we have been, graced with many of the stories, much of the knowledge, and much of the thinking of people like Kalia, who has filled our space with many things, permanent objects as well as powerful words. And that is what we're about. That is why we're so excited that this is happening tonight, this conversation, as well as the creation and presentation of the book. We have a lot of scholars, we have a lot of artists, we have a lot of community members, we have union activists who work with us, and even beyond. And a lot of literature has been shared with us and the stories inside of that. And we're grateful for the people who have done that. We have a lot of events. You can visit our website at eastsidefreedomlibrary.org. There are things coming up soon. We're going to have a bonfire on our lawn, which worries me quite a bit, but I'm told that it's under control. But on the 5th of October at 7 o'clock, we're going to have another book event. Renee Hansen is going to be virtually with us to present their book Watershed, Attending to Body and Earth in Distress. We have a whole lot of other events that convey that, and we welcome your joining those conversations as you have done with this one. And so we're so grateful that you're here. Be sure to visit us. Be sure to get a copy of the book if you can. It's good to purchase it from SubText, or if you have a favorite independent bookstore someplace else, do that. Libraries are good too. But please join us in the conversation by getting your hands on the book as well. And I will pass it over with that.
Thanks so much, Clarence. Now I'm going to introduce our two authors. Mai Der Vang is an editorial member of the Hmong American Writers Circle. Her poetry has appeared in the New Republic, Poetry, and the Virginia Quarterly Review, and her essays have been published in the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and the Washington Post. Her debut collection, Afterland, received the Walt Whitman Award from the Academy of American Poets. She lives in California. Kao Kalia Yang is a Hmong American writer, teacher, and public speaker. Her works of creative nonfiction include The Late Homecomer, among a family memoir, The Song Poet, What God is Honored Here, writings on miscarriage and infant loss by and for Indigenous women and women of color, and Somewhere in the Unknown World. Yang has also written multiple children's books, such as A Map into the World, The Shared Room, The Most Beautiful Thing, Yang Warriors, and the forthcoming From the Tops of the Trees. Her work has won numerous awards and recognition, including multiple Minnesota Book Awards, a Charlotte Zolotel Honor, an ALA Notable Children's Book Award, Dayton's Literary Peace Prize, and a PEN USA Award in Nonfiction. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mai Der and Kalia. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sarah and Clarence. It's wonderful to be with all of you this evening, and I hope that you're all having a good day. Thank you all for taking time out of your Friday evening to join us. To start, I'm going to proceed in reading, but before I do that, I would like to acknowledge the indigenous lands of the Yokuts and the Mono here in Fresno, California, where I live and work, and also where I wrote the bulk of my book, Yellow Rain, and I pay my respects to the elders and ancestors, both past, present, and emerging. I'm very grateful to SubText Bookstore in St. Paul, Minnesota, the Eastside Freedom Library again, Graywolf Press, my publisher, and of course to Kao Kalia Yang, who I'm thrilled to have join me this evening in conversation. So I just finished my second book of poems, which is why you're all here. And the book focuses on the topic of yellow rain. And you may have heard about yellow rain, you may know a little bit about it, or you may know nothing about it. Just a little bit about me. I'm a daughter of Hmong refugees, and my parents, like so many others, escaped Laos following the end to the secret war and the US withdrawal from Vietnam. And when Hmong refugees were fleeing Laos, many of them reported that there was a mysterious substance falling from planes that made them sick, and that many people died from it. And they told this to the refugee camp workers and doctors who really had no clue what to make of it. So that's just a little bit of sort of opening context on what yellow rain is and what it's been defined as. The first poem I'd like to read is actually a poem I wrote for you, Kalia. And the we in this poem can be thought of as, you and I. And it's a poem that attempts to create a shared moment of solidarity and a reaching back to those who are gone. So. All right, so first poem. They think our killed ones cannot speak to us. As if to adjourn all oxygen from the neck is how they try to take the voice. As if attempts to render us pale, ripped lungless from woke into wild ash. As if ashes cannot blink, howl, testify with the pulse of their own tatters. As if hymn and whistle, hail and pour. We've seen how they shame the light. Stripped hollow, tearing out filigrees of stars from protocols of dust to make drink a bouquet of venom sprayed down a constellation's throat. They must be so earless, as if we've no legs to kneel. We are each other's memory of the future 40 years from here, arriving at ourselves by way of the dead. History will not beget powder, will not beget myth, will not make us into marginalia. As ever possessed by what we have lost, there are no language barriers in the afterlife. A toxin is a toxin is a toxin, is the man-made truth, is the dead who leave everything behind. So as time went on, more and more people began to talk about this yellow rain, or this kemi, as it was referred to by some of the Hmong refugees. And what happened was that the US government began to take interest in that. And the government conducted what would become a very confusing 8-year investigation into yellow rain. And it wasn't just the US government, but other governments were also taking note of yellow rain too. I think the big question was that if this really was a biological weapon, then who was the perpetrator, and had any treaties been breached or violated as a result of that? You have to keep in mind too that all of this was happening during the Cold War, when the United States was at odds with the Soviet Union. And so much of that factored into the discussion and debate on yellow rain. And the point of the investigation was to figure out who was to blame. And in the case of the US government, they pointed the finger at the Soviet Union, who they accused of providing yellow rain to the communists to use against the Hmong people. And one of the key components of the investigation were the thousands of blood and vegetation samples that were provided by Hmong refugees. And what's really heartbreaking is that even though these samples were given in the hope of being able to find out what yellow rain was, it was pretty much futile, because these samples had to be shipped to laboratories in the United States. And by the time they arrived, many of them had already degraded and disintegrated in terms of their, in terms of the sample quality. So, and there were also instances of cracked vials and poor packaging, or packages getting lost in transit. So many logistical barriers were hindering the potential to find out what yellow rain even was. And this was something that I learned when I came across a dissertation by Dr. Rebecca Katz, who makes the argument in her dissertation that it's very likely that some kind of toxin was used against the Hmong people. So the next poem that I want to read for all of you is actually a poem that examines the process of routing and shipping all of these samples. Authorization to depart ravaged homeland as biomedical sample. Flew you afar, piecemealed bits of spleen, liver, tissues of the second gut, orphaned by the whole. Routed you in a vacutainer, Bangkok, Frankfurt delayed Dulles, Fort Detrick, as if only born to serve in postmortem, detain offerings of cerebral shards to be juried under a lens. Flew you from the silken wilderness of your viscera, from all the vacated leftovers of yourself, sinews snipped, culled from the ribs. In this mission of guilt for your unleaving, you've trekked far from the village, salvaged insides from you and other hundreds, sealed on letterhead, dispersed to the globe. Here at long last, in these United States, you did not land a body, only as a vial of blood were you registered as urine, did they label you asylum. Sample M3582, victim 7 en route to London. Fluids of you granted fare to enter refugee airspace while ending away in hospital camps stayed behind, the sourced you and every else part. Sample M2582, victim 9, no weekend courier, ambiguously arriving so stomach of laments, how could they not get you here somehow? Only drops relayed lab to lab to lab. Cargo of you quaking inside an ice chest. So as the investigation continued, there was a scientist, Dr. Chester Marocha, who had discovered suspicious levels of trichothecene mycotoxin on a leaf. And from that, the US government began to build its case. And in many ways, the government wanted to be able to argue that yellow rain was a biological weapon and that the Soviet Union was culpable. And this was an argument that would have been a huge boon to the government, especially those in government who favored increased arms development, because then they could use this to justify more weapons, more bombs, they could exploit the Hmong story to push Congress for more defense spending. So in other words, it was kind of like, look what the Soviets are doing to these poor Hmong. We have to respond by building up our own arsenal in defense of the Soviets, right? That was one side of the argument. But then there were also those within government and within the scientific community, led primarily by Harvard professor Dr. Matthew Meselson, who had a very different approach and a different agenda. And it seems to me that they were coming from a perspective to prevent the proliferation of weapons in the world, with a focus really towards disarmament. And they seemed very much at odds with those who favored more defense spending on weapons. So Dr. Meselson, along with others, proposed that what had been thought of as a biological weapon, this yellow rain stuff, was really just the fecal matter of bees defecating in large swarms. In other words, they said it was just bee shit, and that the Hmong people just didn't know any better. And their concern was that if yellow rain really was a biological weapon, then it could potentially escalate political tensions around the world. So it was almost like, in order to prevent further conflict, it was just more convenient to say that the Hmong people had lied, almost, even if Hmong people were really dying from it. And that's sort of my thinking. That's my take from it. That's what I've discovered through the process of researching. And I think in the end, while the two sides were kind of bickering over their politics, the Hmong people were just stuck in the middle. And it's almost as if no one really cared what was going to happen to the Hmong people. And so this next poem I want to read for all of you is a poem where the speaker tries to undo the blame that's been placed on the bees. The culpable. When all else fails, you'll indict the bees. When all else rushes at your awareness in the stage of sudden beasts, you'll second guess if it had been the bees. You'll claim the moonlight betrayed you, to know and see anything but only with a knife. When all else relents and you are kneeled for an answer, you'll go back to spying on the bees, censoring their course the way you faulted us into outlaws caught between hopeless and hopelessness, doubting us in the throat of your blame, saying malice to the grass, saying bees sired the venom that sired our lies that could sire another war. What fate tilted in your favor, counter the weight back to us. What fate tilted in your favor, counter the weight back to bees. Okay, I think I have one more poem that I'd like to share with you all before Kalia joins me in conversation. I hope you're all doing all right now, hanging in there. So I started doing the research on this book almost a decade ago, and most of that consisted of digging through archival material, declassified documents, and government reports. And when I think about what this book means to me, it's my attempt to try and remember what's happened, to resurrect the investigation, to shed more light on it, and to create a counter narrative in some ways, to offer a public and a poetic reckoning of its aftermath. And so the last poem I want to read for all of you is a poem that I think of as a kind of lament and a call to remembrance. Noxious. No is the mind of the orphaned storm, gravity of skin falling off in great sheets. They built this stealth weather wrought from faux organs without a cloud to its breath. What they built was a winter in which to leave me. No is the yellow wing, rain spots on banana leaves as fingerprints of the dead. It is the wish to hunt ice when the blood learns the meaning of never. It is the rise inside a rooster's crow, pretense of arms from a ragged shape made unwhole. The face is a mechanical cloth tethered to the evocation of daylight. They stockpile the hours in beds of the missing, in shattered vials gathered by the witnessing moon. Thank you all so very much. Hi.
Thank you so much, Mai Der, for that beautiful reading and introduction to the book. As I said to Jeff Schatz when I was asked to see if I'd like to read this manuscript, I've waited a long time for this book, and I'm sure you know that. In all transparency to viewers out there, 9 years ago, I was interviewed with my uncle on a Radiolab podcast radio show about yellow rain. I was not introduced by name. I was known as Denise, but it was about the subject, and it wreaked havoc in my heart. So for many years, although it's 9 years ago, for me, it's fresh in my memories. I've waited for this book. And I've also waited a long time to be in conversation with a Hmong American artist. You know, we've been working in tandem in different directions, you in Minnesota and me in the Midwest in Minnesota. But there aren't many of us. And it's shocking that it's taken like a decade for the two of us to be in conversation. So this is a very important moment in my life and my work. And I thank you for yours. I'd like to echo Mai Der in thanking SubText and the Eastside Freedom Library for hosting this conversation tonight. Because of you both, another dream has come true for this writer. So thank you. Mai Der, I had no idea that poem, when I read in the collection, that it was in any part for me, other than the fact that I'm Hmong and, you know, we're both in this field together. But I'm so moved. You know, in many ways, your work has been in conversation with my work for a long time. In this current moment, we are, all of us, we hope the hopeful tail end of a pandemic. My first question for you, how does it feel to have this book come out right now?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for prefacing and for sharing. Before I get to your question, just thank you for you know, offering to our listeners, our viewers tonight, your experience with, you know, the Radiolab episode, and yeah, just what you had to go through with that experience. And yes, that poem, you know, it's funny when I think about that poem, I know I wrote that poem for you when I first sat down to think about it. And yeah, I thought about that in that poem. And for this book to come out at this time, you know, you never plan for when things will happen, especially with books and publishing, right? I couldn't have expected this ever in my life, to have a book come out during a pandemic, and also a book like Yellow Rain come out during a pandemic. I'm just grateful that it's here. You know, pandemic or no pandemic, I'm just grateful that the work is here, and you know, obviously grateful to my publisher Graywolf Press for you know, the support with it. It's definitely a book to work through. You know, it's not just a book you easily can say, yeah, I mean, it's a book that you know, it requires some consideration, and some working through and thinking. But you know, they were just totally supportive. Graywolf has just been incredibly amazing throughout the whole process, and I'm just happy to have a book, you know. And if that means it's a book for anyone, if it's a book, it can be a book for anyone who has been having questions about Yellow Rain, or it can be a book for anyone from any community who has had to reckon with the difficult and complicated histories that's been encroached upon them by, you know, by empire, by Western-backed governments who have, you know, displaced them in one way or another. Yeah.
You know, I've been thinking about all of those forces at play right now in our current moment. We live in a world that is sadly creating more and more refugees all the time. You know, you, I'm sure, have seen, as I have, all the images of what's been happening in Afghanistan. You know, in many ways, to me, your book doesn't just speak to the past; it speaks very much to our present moment. You, as the author, I'm curious, and I want to know, you know, how is this book in conversation with the moment that you and I are living in, that so much of the world is living in at the moment? This world filled with refugees in the making, refugees unseen and unheard, oftentimes.
Yeah. it's just it's a lot to process. And when I think about the time that it has taken for just the Hmong, for me to write something like this, well, from the time that it's taken from me to grow up as a daughter of Hmong refugees, growing up through the 80s to now, and all the years and decades that happened in between, that's how long it's taken for us, and I can't imagine the kind of time and decades that it will require for the children of refugees today, the children who are witness to what's happening with their parents and families and elders in Afghanistan. 20 years from now, we may have another book kind of like Yellow Rain, but from a daughter of Afghan refugees. And I think that we can at least hold to that possibility, even in spite of the heartbreak and the devastation that so many people are experiencing. There will be a time to reckon with a lot of these things, and I believe in that. That reckoning will happen at some point in time, if not now.
I say this and I believe it, right? There are beliefs about the way the world should be. Our beliefs don't make it so. And yet to live our lives and to do the kind of work that you and I do, in the words of my grandmother, we have to build this infrastructure with our faith, not our fears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For everything that you've learned in the process of working on this book, what have you come to believe? What have you come to in terms of faith? Perhaps not in the colonial powers that are, but in the powers of memory, the gift of time, how it allows one to reckon with the past and the present, perhaps even the future.
Yeah, I feel like working on this book has allowed me to honor the things that I don't know, to honor the questions that remain, and to honor my own uncertainties about the experience of having to do this work, and because before going into all this work, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. All I know was that something wasn't right about the whole Yellow Rain story. And then just, hearing the Radio Lab, episode, that you went through, and just really, again, for me, cemented this idea that something just wasn't right about all of it. And for me, it just meant that that there was work ahead, definitely, for me, and to kind of keep my ear to the ground as to this particular topic, and to continue to do the work I needed to do to look into it, and to commit myself, right, to immerse myself in it, even though I knew it felt like a very daunting project. I also, through the process, learned that we take on some of this work hoping that we will find the ultimate answer to everything, and even if the answers don't come through to us in these declassified documents, because they've just been so heavily redacted, even if they're not there in front of our face, we know that there's a kind of truth that has already been erased because of the need to cloak so much of this. And that's, I think, what I felt. Like I felt that the truth would be somehow that I could use these poems as a way to bring out other kinds of truths, other potential for truth. Yeah, it's kind of what I was thinking. It's just being able to honor my own uncertainties about how to approach all of this work.
Beyond my own individual enthusiasm at seeing this incredibly beautiful book in the world, I'm sure you and I and so many others celebrated Suni Salih's Olympic wins. Oops, this is the beauty of having a standing desk. Apologies. But we celebrated her win along with so much of the world. How is your family and the community there in Fresno celebrating this different kind of victory, that of Yellow Rain, the book?
Yeah, I'm lucky to be part of a community here in Fresno where there is a very large Hmong population, and my family too here. And it was, yeah, I agree. We were all just overjoyed, with Sunisa's gold medal win, and it just feels like there's a lot to celebrate, even in the midst of the years and decades of heartbreak and devastation. But yeah, a lot of people have reached out to me and said they are so grateful for the book. I've had people message on Facebook and say things like, thank you for writing this. My dad used to talk about yellow rain all the time and how he had lost his family members to it. And that just, it really sort of takes the work to another level, that you realize that you're like, this isn't just mine. This is a collective story. Yeah, it's always meaningful when readers are able to offer that kind of feedback and say what it means to them. Yeah.
You and I know that books are not written alone, and I know that in some ways you had a team, not only at Graywolf, but of course in your own private life, pushing this book into the world. As a Minnesotan, I can only say I'm super excited and proud that Graywolf has put out another book by Mai Der Vang, Yellow Rain, this one. In the current publishing landscape, I'm curious, what kept you returning to Graywolf, or why did you come here in the first place? And what does a publisher like Graywolf what does that mean for a career like yours?
Yeah, I feel that I feel grateful and very lucky to have been able to team up with Graywolf on both of my books so far. They published my first book of poems, Afterland, and that was a book that received the Walt Whitman Award from the Academy of American Poets, and by virtue of receiving that award, the book was published through Graywolf. And so, I remember the first time I met Jeff Schatz at AWP, and he was just so, it felt like it was like a realization and a long time coming for him that they're like, yes, you're Mai Der Vang. We have been looking for someone, or like we know that Hmong writers exist, and it was just finally this connection that he was able to kind of make with me, and it was a really meaningful first encounter with Jeff at AWP, who was just so grateful to be able to connect with me, and not realizing then too that they were going to find a Hmong poet in California too, was of all places. But yeah, it's been tremendously wonderful to work with Graywolf, and I think that, as I continue to do this work, I teach at Fresno State as well in the MFA program, where I've had the chance to also support emerging Hmong writers. One of the organizations I serve as a faculty advisor for is the Hmong American Ink and Stories, who I think I saw someone, Jur Shong, on here, who helped start that organization. And so, yeah, we're continuing to sort of, take on small grassroots sort of campus level efforts to continue to support Hmong American writers and especially the emerging ones, because I think it's part of what I will always want to continue to do. It's part of something that I will continue to sort of push for is how we can create that access and that opportunity for the next wave of Hmong writers, who I'm really excited to support and see come through the publishing process as well.
It's you've been working to support Hmong American writers for a long time. I remember coming to California when my first book was published, and somebody said to me, if Minnesota has you, then we have Mai Der Vang. And I'm like, who is Mai Der Vang? And this woman said to me, the best poet you will ever meet. So I was really excited to meet you then, but I also knew that even then you were inspiring people in the community. You've been now at this for a long time in terms of the Hmong poetry. When we speak, me along with others, we speak your name, and of course Katie, Sol, but it's only a handful of people. What has the journey been like? Have you been lonely? I'm just curious. Have you been lonely?
It's, it's being a writer is lonely enough, but then to be a Hmong writer is like that loneliness is compounded, right? Because you're not sure if there are other people out there. And that's how I felt when I first started out, is just like, when I first started out decades before I connected with the Hmong American Writer Circle, it was sort of like, how do I do this if I want to do this? Is it even, to be a writer, what does it even take? Is it something feasible? Are we even allowed to have, are we allowed to have writers? Are we allowed to pursue writing? And so when I started writing many, many decades ago, it was definitely in isolation. It was alone. It was, an absolute doubt and lack of confidence in myself, as we all do when we first start out writing. And it wasn't until I had met Burley Vang and the Hmong American Writer Circle that I was able to then find a sense of community and connect with other Hmong writers who were also doing the work that needed to happen. And so, yeah, nowadays it's like it's kind of sprang out and branched out into other smaller, similar writing group efforts too, with student orgs and Hmong literary journals. But yeah, and I think about that time you came to Fresno and how much we loved it. And just, I think it was for an organization called Central California Asian Pacific Women. And we filled up that Chinese restaurant. We were like, in the back.
Mm-hmm.
It was just incredible to have you there. I think we were just so honored and in absolute awe of you. Then I think that, yeah.
Well, I remember that because that was like the first time I met you,
Yes,
and
yeah.
we knew that although we were working from different places, our journeys were somehow tied. That
Yeah.
some people would perhaps read us as doing the same work, despite the fact that, I creative nonfiction, poetry.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, with all of the incredible poets moving into prose, here I'm thinking about Ocean Vuong, Ilya Kaminsky, and others. Will we be seeing that for you as well? Are you going to make any shifts into prose?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right. I have I've written essays, but nothing that has been sort of solidified or concrete. So we'll see. Yeah, I am open and I am interested. I will always love poetry though. Poetry is always my sort of my first my will always be my go-to, right? Because it's what I love to do. But I am also really excited about possibilities in prose, and yeah, we'll see what comes of that. Yeah,
this is wonderful. I've read your essays, and I'm excited to welcome such a possibility into the world. I'm curious. We talk about the love of poetry. How did this Hmong girl in the Central Valley come to love poetry? And did poetry happen for you first in English or Hmong?
Yeah. So growing up, for me, I grew up in a multi-generational home. So, I had my grandmother. We were lucky to have her living with us too, and just during those years growing up, you just encounter so much as a child, and you're just living your life, right? You're just living your kid life, in a refugee family. And, for me, we were surrounded by so much, in some ways kind of questions too about what, about Hmong identity, and questions about the war, even if and when my parents didn't really kind of sit us down and say this is what the war is. But in all of that, I think for me, just having grown up, with the Hmong language as well, and hearing the tones of the Hmong language, I feel like that has somehow impacted the way that I write my poems, because I'm always I want to be always attentive to sound in my poem. And I've noticed that that's something that really contributes to the way that I think about my writing, is the tonal and sonic qualities of language, especially as I think back to having grown up in a Hmong family where I heard Hmong, the Hmong language every day. And then also, I think for me, like writing poetry, I didn't actually think about officially writing poetry until I was maybe like in middle school. And I don't know if you had that experience too growing up, but I had that experience where I would write poems to my friends, and we would write, like just roses are red, violets are blue, that kind of stuff. And that's ultimately how I started. I was also very lucky to have, growing up, some really amazing English teachers who, in high school and middle school, who really were able to nurture a love for poetry, and for the reading of and the engagement of with poetry. And so these I guess these experiences really helped to shape who I would become and what I would want to do with my life. In my family, I have a pretty big family. There's like 8 of us kids, and mostly I have sisters, and most of them are in the medical field. I'm probably the only one in my family that is doing anything really like odd or different, which is writing, and I wonder if it's like that for you, where you have to like you're for me, like my parents were really supportive about me going into writing, because they understood that we need like there is agency and capacity to being able to communicate, to be able to express yourself in English, because that it just demonstrates that you can be just as good as anyone else, that you can articulate yourself, and you can, and so I was very lucky to have parents who nurtured my need to want to write. And oftentimes they used me also as their communicator, right? And I'm sure, you might have had a similar experience too growing up, where your parents relied on you to help communicate. And so, yeah, well, my experiences, I think, with literacy have helped shape what I would want to eventually become and do as a poet. Yeah.
I love what you said about hearing the sound of the Hmong language, right? Tonality in English and in poetry. Although I work in prose, I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I hear it all the time, the cadence of the speech, certain ways of saying,
Yeah.
all of the language.
That's what I do too. Like I'm thinking about like monosyllabic, because most Hmong words are monosyllabic, and I'm so drawn to like the monosyllabic rhythm in my own poems that I'm always searching for those monosyllables to string together. Even my name, Mai Der, is 2 monosyllables essentially, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, my final question for you, because I understand that I want to leave room for the audience as well. You and we start out young, but we're not quite as young as we used to be. I don't know that we're new in writing anymore. What have you discovered about publishing in this country, working in English, that you didn't know when you were starting out? And how does that knowledge inform who you are and who you want to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like what did I learn as far as publishing and how that's informed? I feel that for me as a poet, because I'm a Hmong writer, I feel like always the stakes are higher for me, versus a writer who may not be Hmong. And so for me, there's always a feeling like I've got to do more. I got to push myself harder. I got to challenge. I got to take the challenge up a little bit. I got to kick it up, another notch or something, because it just feels like, because there are so few of us, like you said earlier, the stakes are higher. The outcomes that we can produce through this feels so much more necessary, and because of those stakes. And so for me, I have learned that, like, even if I am a Hmong person, even, if, being a daughter of refugees, having grown up with such little access to publishing and writing, having grown up with such little access to work by other Hmong writers, like, it's just taught me that, that we deserve to have a space. We deserve to have a space where we can be heard too, that we can also, create the kind of literary landscape that our elders wish that they could have had for us, and or that they could have wished that they could have had for themselves, but that we can then begin to create. And I feel like for me, like I'm just so happy and grateful to be where I am, but I'm also aware that like this has been a long time coming for our community. And yeah, everyone always says to refugees and to immigrants, oh, you should be grateful for this, or you should be grateful for that, and I'm almost like, I am grateful, but I know this is what, like, this is, you've done that to my country, and now, like, this is what I deserve to have in the end, or this is what I feel that has been a long time being owed to our community, to our elders, to our ancestors. And we have to write it out. We have to be willing to push and forge ahead in the world of publishing. We have to believe that there is a space for our voice to be heard. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mai Der Vang. I'm so happy that you're in the world, and I'm so excited that this book is in the world, that it answers not only the questions in my own heart, or the heart of the Hmong community, but I think in so many other people's hearts all around this world, in this current moment that we live in the different histories that have made us possible, and for all that is still to come, because history likes to repeat itself. Sarah, at this time, you can come back on and facilitate the Q&A with the audience. Thank you for a wonderful conversation, Mai Der.
Thank you so much, Kalia. It's been just wonderful to, like you said, finally be able to just talk and chat and just be able to celebrate just all the work that you've accomplished as well over the last decades, and the incredible contributions you've made too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Looks like we have a question from the audience. Why did you choose poetry as the form for Yellow Rain? What did you think it could accomplish compared to other forms?
Yeah, great question there. For me, I feel that with poetry, there is a way that I can sort of explore and push language to sort of be able to tell its own kind of truth, or to be able to tell a truth about Yellow Rain. And so that's what I love about poetry, is it's just the dexterousness and the pliability to be able to take language and shape it to my own imagination. And again, it goes back to whether it's the sounds that I hear, whether it's the way that it looks on the page, whether it's the choices of the words that I'm using to be able to convey an emotion or feeling or an image. I just love that there are so many ways to think about how we can sort of, work in partnership with the language to tell these other kinds of truths, right? And now the other thing too about poetry is just being able to dismantle language in order to reassemble it. And you'll see if you look at my book that there are ways in which I do try to do that, with the collages and the visuals too that show up throughout the collection. It's just really a chance for me to kind of offer language, but in other ways, in other forms, to think of those visuals as their own kind of text as well for me. And so, yeah, poetry for me just seemed to be the most pliable form to work with for Yellow Rain, because there were just so many things I wanted to say about Yellow Rain. And so, yeah.
That actually leads into a question that I had.
Sure.
I'm going to ask in a selfish way. I am really interested in like the collage moments and how you really do work with the physical text. Was that always something that you were doing, or was that after you had written, a few words and you mashed up together? Talk more about your process with that.
Yeah, the collages were something that I didn't expect to add to the book. I just, they happened because I had so much information that I was drawing from. I had sort of binders of documents, and I printed a lot of these out just because I needed to be able to see them. But I was like, how am I going to synthesize all of this into something that my reader will be able to gauge? And the collages came in as a way to be able to offer the text, the language in its most sort of upfront, crude form, but then to be able to sort of, take parts and bits that I felt that I felt were part of the answer to Yellow Rain, and then be able to sort of, sort of assemble them on a page together. And when I did one of the first ones, like the first collage that shows up in the collection, is a collage that features and discusses the various cases of the attacks. I just thought, how am I going to show the immensity of the attacks? And so for me, it was just, okay, I'm going to take the language of the attacks, and I'm going to just plaster them on the page. And I think that gives my reader a sense of just the severity, and I think for me, it was trying to figure out how to offer that severity, but in a visual form. Yeah.
Well, we still have time, so if you were sitting on a question, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll get to it at the end. This is more of just a surface level question, but for both of you, what are you reading right now? So I'm just nosy and curious.
Kalia, you want to start?
I am reading Braiding Sweetgrass. I remember early on, I sat on an airplane by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and then we were talking, and I said, "Oh, what do you do?" And she said, "I'm a writer." And I said, "Oh, what's your book?" And she said, "This book called Braiding Sweetgrass." In fact, I've just visited my editor, the publishing house, and I'm on my way back. And I was like, one day I'm going to read your book. That book, of course, has exploded. And finally, 3 babies later, I am reading it. And what a gift. I'm so happy that I waited, Sarah. Sometimes life works out this way, Kimmer's, the sections about her daughters, the anticipation of a day when perhaps they won't need her anymore. I mean, mine are still tiny, but it's making me feel, and giving me room to feel some of the fears, for the same reason that I watch horror films. It allows me to encounter certain situations. And so I'm feeling my way through her, through her kids going off to college, and thinking perhaps one day mine will too, but I will already know a little bit about how that feels. So Braiding Sweetgrass is the perfect book for me to read in 2021. And I think it's a perfect book for many of you to read if you have not yet read it. Braiding Sweetgrass is a gem and a treasure.
Yeah, that's cool. I've been reading still sort of a lot of poetry, and it's been really exciting for me to see the work of a lot of Vietnamese American poets, like Sophia Terazawa's Winter Phoenix, or Susan Nguyen's Dear Diaspora. So those have been some really exciting books recently, and they're very new too. They think they just came out. I mean, one is just came out in September, and the other one's coming out in October. So yeah, I'm just really diving into so many new and exciting poetry collections, and really excited to also encounter the work of many new and emerging Vietnamese American poets.
I think we have time for one more question. What did you discover in the writing of the poems that research may not have allowed for on its own?
Yeah, what I discovered in the writing of the poems, I feel like with the writing of the poems, and this is something that I'm always thinking about when I set out to write a poem, is like, and I tell this to a lot of my students too, like, I don't know where the poem is going to take me. I don't know how I don't even know what I'm going to say in the poem. I have a sense of it, but it's not clear yet. And for me, I think that, I guess I discovered, and I knew that I was already angry, but I guess I discovered that I had a lot of that sort of, just that heartache coming through in a lot of these poems in ways that I didn't do with Afterland, you know, in ways that the poems in Afterland were more sort of lamenting, you know, the losses. Whereas with this collection, I really felt that I needed to give myself a space to be angry. You know, if I wanted to be angry over the Yellow Rain, or if I needed to be, if I needed to sort of demonstrate a kind of like, you know, just agency over the situation, or if I needed to assert myself, you know, I had to do that. And I really loved that. I didn't know that I was going to do that in these poems, and I didn't discover or anticipate that the research would lead me to feel so frustrated about what happened with Yellow Rain, and just to feel as though, you know, that it was just, that it's all just so heartbreaking. Like when you think about the full story, and this goes back to sort of, you know, Kalia, your experience with Radio Lab too. It's just, you know, like this is about us being able to like give our version, and to give another version, to give another narrative, because for so long the dominant narrative has been led by these scientists, these government leaders, and the Hmong voice and all of that was lost and gone and completely ignored. And so for me, I think that I hope that comes through in my poems in the collection.
Well, I hate to say it, but we are coming up towards the end. But thank you so much, both of you, for joining us tonight. Mai Der, congratulations on this fantastic book. Congratulations, it's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for spending your Friday night with us. You can pick up a copy of Yellow Rain from SubText Books, or your local indie. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.